Welcome. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the ABCs of behaviorism. Now, the reason this is important as we move into a conversation around emotions is we will see how emotions are behaviorally conditioned and then how the effects of emotions further affect our behaviors. And we'll see this in a continuous cycle of antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So to initially discuss this, we'll use an example of a mom taking their kid to a grocery store, and we've all seen this, so we know exactly how this works. So the mom takes the kid to the grocery store, and at the grocery store, the kid sees their favorite candy bar. Naturally, by seeing the candy bar, the kid's behavior is to say, "Mom, I want the candy bar." Now, the consequence is that the kid is told no. Now, you have to see that the kid's behavior of asking for the candy bar for the mother is the mother's antecedent, right? So this is a chain of behaviors between two people. So the kid's request for a candy bar triggers the mom to say no. Her no now has a consequence. The kid starts having a temper tantrum. Okay, now for the mom, the temper tantrum is a new antecedent. What is she going to do about it? Is she going to tell her kid no again? Is she going to use some skill to distract the kid? Is she going to give in? So let's just say initially she says no. Now this new no is the child's antecedent. Now the kid knows if it yells and screams loud enough, or at least it believes this, that it will then get the candy bar. So it's going to try the skill again. Now we have to know that behaviors are often, they're not this conscious. A lot of times a person will just try it because they know it's worked in the past. So so before it was a 4 out of 10 on the temper tantrum, now it's an 8 out of 10. The mom's like at her last peak end and she says, okay, fine. I'm still going to say no. So the kid at this point is kind of at the end of its rope. Does it give up on a skill and a strategy that's worked to get candy bars in the past, or does the kid let it go? Nope, we're going to try it again at 10 out of 10. Now, if the mom continues to say no, there might be an opportunity here for her to stop the kid's behavior, to quote, extinguish it. When a behavior occurs, you have three options for consequences. You can reinforce the behavior, so if she gives the candy bars to reinforcement. If she continues to say no and not allow the kid to have it, it is a type of punishment and decreases the likelihood. And ultimately, it can be extinguished, and that's the third option. Now the thing is, it's easier for a person to continue to try an old behavior than it is to try something new. So a mom could teach the kid another skill, and if not, the kid could be creative and figure something out on its own. But the reality is, a person, as they try their skills, they're actually going to get kind of stressed, and it's going to be difficult. And the likelihood is that they'll regress to a younger level of functioning and development, which is likely to cause them to try old skills. Like maybe they'll just lay down and be completely limp and dead, right? And then the mom has to pick up the kid and go from there. All right, so all that said, the other option the mom has instead of reinforcing, punishing, and extinguishing is she could change the antecedent next time. We know that parents will frequently not take their children to stores where they are likely to have a temper tantrum, and for good reason. Now, a similar example to this is I have a sweet tooth sometimes, and I like to eat ice cream. And I know that it's common for me, if there's ice cream, to eat more than I want to. So I have the behavior of eating it and a consequence of getting fat, which then is the trigger for some sort of unwanted thoughts about, oh, I'm fat or this or that, or I don't have enough self-control, which then creates this kind of cycle. So for me, the antecedent is I don't bring home a half gallon of ice cream. I only obtain as much ice cream as I'm willing to eat at a single time, so then when I'm done, I feel good about myself. So that is the way that I use antecedent interventions in my everyday life. Now, here's a different example of this. I'm here trying to teach you the ABCs of behaviorism, which is an antecedent leading to a behavior, leading to a consequence of hopefully you're learning it. So I'm teaching it, and I don't know if you just noticed there, I stammered. So I might think to myself, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible teacher and no one will ever understand what I'm doing. The consequence of that may be I start to feel sad and I despair, and the sadness and despair has the belief of like, oh, I'll never be successful at this. And the consequence is actually I put less effort into it. Less effort means I'm not putting myself into a place to keep trying. And the consequence is I do completely fail at this. Judgment. And you can see how these series of thoughts continue to move. Now, perhaps I'm putting this out and I'm thinking to myself, oh, flaws in my presentation are actually an example of perhaps self-compassion and growth and an opportunity for people to see that actually not being perfect is perfectly acceptable. Oh, I'll keep trying. And in fact, over time, maybe I'll get better. And then you can see the consequences. I'm more likely to continue to do this work. Okay, next example. I play a sport called racquetball. And in racquetball, there's many opportunities to make mistakes. So let's just suppose a ball's coming my way, and I hit it right into the ground, which if you don't know racquetball means that I lose that point. Now, my behavior might be I might slam my racket into the wall, but something more likely would be instead of a behavior, a thought, right? And in this case, a thought and a behavior are synonyms, and the thought may be, I'm terrible and I'll never figure this out. The consequence might be my body might start to feel stress and tighten up. And what I know is that when you have a changed physiology, right? Your changed physiology is an antecedent, a vulnerability factor, which will then make it more difficult for your behavior to be what it wants to be. And then you see you have another vicious cycle occurring. Now, on the other hand, if I skip a ball, I then go and think to myself, oh, it didn't matter, right? So there's a bit of a rationalization. The consequence may be that I don't take the mistake seriously. And the antecedent for the next time is next time I skip it, oh, it doesn't matter. So then I get into the cycle of mediocrity. Okay, now, third example. The ball comes my way and I skip it. Now, I could slam my racket into the wall. I could self-deprecate. I could rationalize. Or instead I could think, I wonder why I did that. Consequence then is I start to think about reasons why that may have happened. So now my thoughts are an antecedent. Okay, I wonder if it's because I had bad form. I wonder if it was because my opponent had good placement. I wonder if it's because I was moving and I didn't have balance. Now, with that information, I can change my behaviors. Now, my behavior, the consequence is the fact that I can choicefully change my behaviors in the future. And I'm in a place where I'm not beating myself up and therefore despairing. It gives me an opportunity to change future behaviors. So we can see the role of how being non-judgmental and how just kind of being curious about process allows for improvement. Okay, the next example is a person who's afraid of heights, fear of heights. They have to climb a ladder. They get up and they start to feel a little bit nervous. They start to shake a little bit, so they get off the ladder. Okay, so what happened is getting off the ladder decreased the amount of nervousness they had. Now, what that does is reinforce their fear of heights. So the next time they have to get on a ladder, they're even more nervous and anxious than they were before. So therefore, they get off more quickly, and this further reinforces it, and it creates a cycle. Now, let's suppose this person has a job, and their job is to, let's say, just stock shelves and have to get on the ladder to do that. So they realize they have to change their behavior. Okay, so what they know is they know that they have to learn the skills in order to be effective. So they decide to go and do some behavioral modification. And this behavioral modification, which is the behavior in this case, is to learn to self-regulate, deep breathe, and to slowly shape their behavior. And by shape in this case, I mean slowly move up one rung at a time until they are able to do what they need to do. So they learn behavioral modification. The consequence of this is they feel more comfortable approaching the first step of the ladder. They're getting ready. They think about getting on the first step of the ladder. They use their behavioral modification. Now, they have less anxiety about getting on it. Now, they're going to take their first step. They get on it, they deep breathe, they relax until they feel comfortable in the first step. This is starting to slowly extinguish the fear of being on the ladder. And then they keep repeating this process again and again and again and again until they're done. So that was an example of fear. Let's look at an example of anger. A boss at work, right, is given information they don't like. Their behavior is to yell at their employees. This is coming from a place of anger. The consequence is their employee doesn't tell them the information they don't want to hear in the future. Doesn't mean it's not there. It means they're not being told. So next time it goes around, right, the employees has more bad news. They yell at them again, and the employee is being further reinforced for not telling bad news. But also notice the boss is being reinforced by yelling because they're now able to avoid what they don't want. And so what we see is all of behavior has two purposes. First purpose may be to obtain something, right? So the kid getting the candy bar. The second behavior is to avoid something, such as the uncomfortable feelings of heights or the bad news, things like this. Okay, one last example, and this one's a little bit more complicated. This is around obsessive compulsive type behaviors. So if you think it through, you'll notice that OCD and those type of behaviors, the obsession is this idea, thought, or feeling that something is off or wrong. There's some sort of discomfort. The compulsion is then a thought or behavior which then decreases the feeling that something is wrong, whether it's a thought or a just emotional type experience. So, for example, once upon a time, I had an issue where for about a month, I was continuously locking my car door. I would go to work and I would lock it, and then I couldn't remember if I locked it, and I felt like I didn't lock it, and I felt nervous, and I'd beep it a whole bunch of times. You have a little clicker, right? And then I'd walk into work, and then I felt like I wasn't sure that I locked it, or maybe I unlocked it. And so what happened was my antecedent was this discomfort of whether or not I actually locked the door. The behavior was beeping it a handful of times, locking it. The consequence was that my locking action decreased the discomfort that I experienced for the short term. For the long term, when I started to walk towards my office, I started to have that feeling again. So I went back and locked it again, which reinforced this feeling that, oh, okay, the locking makes me feel less uncomfortable. And what happened is over a month, what is a healthy behavior, making sure your car door is locked, became something that was somewhat neurotic, where I was continuously locking the car door. And so what I did is I eventually realized that my behavior was conditioned because I was getting into an obsessive compulsive cycle. And so I knew how to desensitize myself to this and kind of do the compulsion inhibition, where you just keep yourself from actually doing the compulsion. So obviously there's a little bit of an issue with that. When you have a car, it's very important that it remains locked. So what I did is I made sure my car was locked by making a note of it. At first, I literally wrote it down. I put on the date, I put on the time, and I wrote that I locked it, and I put it in my pocket. The consequence of that was it slowly began to extinguish this urge, this discomfort I had of not locking it. Now, once it became less of an issue, and I didn't have to start walking to my office and then walking back, I then just said it out loud. Okay, I locked my car door at this time, and I don't need to do it. And the consequence was, again, it was slowly being extinguished. Now, here's the problem. Do I ever want to stop locking my car door? No, so I don't want to wholly extinguish this behavior. So I live in kind of a spectrum of slightly obsessive tendencies to want to make sure my car door is locked, and I would never want to change that. So what I do now is I get out of my car, I click the lock button twice, and on the second time it beeps. That, right, lets me know that the door is locked, and I still have this little bit disquieting feeling, so a lot of times I'll say to myself, oh, I heard the beep, which means it's locked, which continues to reinforce the idea that, okay, I don't need to worry about this anymore. So I don't ever want to completely get rid of that because I want to not have people steal things from my car. So what I'm hoping you can see at this point in the little presentation is how important understanding behaviorism is. It's both exceedingly simple, and you can see it in every moment of your life, and it's really kind of hard to notice all the different interactions. Another takeaway is, if you recall the story about the mom, the kid, and the candy bar, one behavior is another antecedent, and is also a consequence. And so it's a chain, and it's continuously moving. It's continuously moving. And in order to get the maximal amount of freedom in your life, you make choices about antecedents. I don't leave ice cream in my freezer, so that way I can feel better about myself. And I make that decision once, so I don't have to do it over and over and over again. And it also then saves me from the unwanted feelings. Now, you can see how in some ways this is a narrowing of my life, because I'm choicefully narrowing the decisions that I make, and it allows me to have more energy to make decisions in other parts of my life. So with all this, I hope this is helpful, and have a great day.